Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just going to wait a little bit. I see some people trickling in. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today on our virtual program. My name is Jonathan Millard. I'm a museum educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. What you guys are in for is about a 45-minute long program. We'll have some time for questions at the end as well. If you are watching this after the fact, please feel free to comment and respond to the post and ask any questions there as well so everyone can see all your great thoughts. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have a really fun program. We're going to be learning all about highlights of the Intrepid Museum. We're going to see a lot of different things. We're going to explore the ship virtually. Again, my name is Jonathan Millard. I'm a museum educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. We're going to explore Intrepid virtually today, but I am working with you all today in my home in Queens, New York. So today, this is a free program. But if you'd like to support us, please look at the link in the description, and you can do so there so we can continue this very exciting programming that we have for you. So throughout the program, feel free to ask any questions, to make any comments, and we're going to take a look at those, and we'll definitely be able to respond to those and interact as we look at the museum. So let's get started, friends. So the very first thing I want us to do is look at these images and kind of learn about and try to determine what Intrepid is. So we're looking at these two photographs of Intrepid. Feel free to respond in the comments what you notice as we're looking at these images here. So when I look at these images, I see two very different photos showing a very similar object. So we're looking at Intrepid here. And we're seeing one image, a black and white image, and below it says in service. So we're actually seeing the ship in service as it was sailing around the world. And then we're seeing this colorful image of Intrepid as a museum today. So people can come to the museum and learn about it and learn about all the cool objects in its collection. So you might notice a few things that are different from these pictures. We're going to talk a little bit about this as we go throughout the program. And you might be able to notice something on top of the ship here. I'm going to keep using that word ship because Intrepid is very, very large. If it were smaller, I would call it a boat, but it's very, very large, so I'm going to call it a ship. A boat can fit on a ship, but a ship cannot fit on a boat. So Intrepid is located on the Hudson River in New York City. So you please hope that when everything is open, you can get a chance to visit us. So you can even look in this image and see if you can find Intrepid here. So you're looking around, we see New York on one side, New Jersey on the other side. We see some small vessels, some small boats and ships, and you can find the Intrepid Museum located right over here. So I actually see a question pop up from YouTube. We have Benedict asking, the Intrepid was modified for the jet era, right? Yes, that is completely correct. So Intrepid was made to participate in World War II, but the ship was then later modified to participate in the Cold War and then later the Vietnam War. So let's actually take a look at what the ship looks like right now as a museum. And what we can actually do is we can go inside the museum and see what it looks like virtually. So let's make our way to the hangar deck of Intrepid. So if we were to walk inside, this is what our view of the outside would be. But if we were to turn around, we can make our way inside of the ship. So the platform that I'm using right now is called Google Arts and Culture, and it allows us to visit the museum virtually and see what the ship looks like on the inside and up top on the flight deck as well. So I can actually click a little bit forward. We can take a look at a small model of the ship to get an idea of what the ship looks like when it was first made. So let's look at this tiny version of the ship here. This is what the ship would look like when it was first created in 1943, when the ship was made to participate in World War II. So what's interesting about the Intrepid is that it was started to be developed in December 1941. So December 1st, 1941, the United States started to work on this ship. That is because the United States was very concerned what was going on in the world. They were worried that if Germany, as they were gaining more power in Europe, if they had access to the British Navy, that they could use the British Navy to target the United States, they were also worried about the threat of Japan as well. So the United States started developing some ships, and they became very much handy because on December 7th, 1941, something happened. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And now the United States was going to war against Japan, and they needed a very strong fleet to do so. So they were luckily developing Intrepid. So instead of 3 years, that's how long it takes to build a ship as large as Intrepid. Intrepid was built in about 2 years. So Intrepid was built in about 2 years. And the ship would then fight in the Pacific War in World War II against the nation of Japan. So later, Intrepid was involved in the Cold War. So we can actually look at a model of the ship. I'll click back here just so we can see it. So as I'm moving around, spinning around the ship here, we can see what the ship looked like during the Cold War and the Vietnam War after it got some renovations. So just take a look at this photo here. And what do we notice as we are looking at this images? What are some changes as we are looking at this version of Intrepid in the Cold War? What are some things that we see? And I'm going to just ask my colleague to full screen this image for me. I'm in some trouble full screening this here. So as we look at this model, we might notice some things are a little bit different. Yes, so Benedict mentioned we see a new angled runway on the flight deck here. So the planes that are going to be on Intrepid during this time are going to be jet planes. So this is Intrepid modified for the jet age. So we have 2 separate runways, one runway for landing and another runway for taking off. So you might have noticed we see some aircraft on the model here. And that is because Intrepid is an aircraft carrier. So because Intrepid is an aircraft carrier, its main role is to be a floating airport at sea. So another way to think about this and to think about the role of an aircraft carrier is actually to think of it through sign language. So I want to share some sign language with you all. So something I want to share with you is if you put one hand in front of your face like so, and you put your other hand in front of your face like so, if you put your 2 hands together, you're creating the sign for ship in American Sign Language. So we have our lovely ships here. Feel free to make your lovely ship. And what you can do, you can leave one hand like so, leave one hand as a ship and take your other hand. And you're going to make a fist with that hand. And what you're going to do, you're going to take your thumb out, you're going to take your pinky out and your pointer finger out like so. And you guys just created a plane in American Sign Language. So we have a plane, and then we also have a ship. That's what Intrepid is. Intrepid is a ship where planes can land and take off. So right now, you guys are all doing the sign for aircraft carrier in American Sign Language. So Intrepid, as an aircraft carrier, had a lot of people working on it, had a lot of planes on board in order to do its job, but they also had, like I mentioned, a lot of individuals working. So I want to take you guys to look at something very, very exciting as we discuss the people working on the ship. Something very exciting. I don't think you'll be able to handle how exciting this is. The very exciting thing that I'm going to take you all to see is chairs. I know. Very exciting. And I'm sure all of you are so excited right now. So something you guys can do at this moment is put one hand up, and I want you to do me a favor and point at some chairs for me. Okay, so can we all point at the most boring chair? Let's point at the most boring chair. Don't point at me. I'm not a chair. So we're pointing at the most boring chair. Very nice, friends. Can we now point at the most comfortable chair? Maybe you wish you were sitting in this chair instead of whatever chair you may be sitting in at home. Okay. How about we point at the most exciting chair? Very nice, point at the most exciting chair. How about we point at the most dangerous looking chair? Maybe you think this chair is a little dangerous. And lastly, can we point at the scariest looking chair? The chair that we may think is the scariest. The chair we think is the scariest. All right, friends. So I apologize if anyone here is afraid of all chairs. I'm sorry for bringing you here. I thank you for being very brave at this moment. Okay, but when I think of the scariest chair for me is actually this second chair over here. And what that chair is a dentist chair on board the ship. So we have a dentist chair on board the ship. So some of us may be confused because we said we have a ship with airplanes landing and taking off. We have an aircraft carrier. Why might there be a dentist chair on board the ship? And that is because there was a dentist on board the ship. So that tells me that the crew of Intrepid were here for a long period of time. So if there were a short period of time, they would not need a dentist on board because they could go on land, go to a dentist, they'd be fine. But they wanted to have a dentist on board. So a lot of us may have experience during this pandemic to being stuck in one place and wanting a lot of things with us, but not having that with us, right? So on Intrepid, the crew was on the ship for 6 to 9 months and they wanted to have certain things with them. That included a dentist, that included all different types of jobs on board. So not only a dentist, but a doctor, not only also someone to cook for them, right? Laundry, a barber shop, all the different jobs you would have in a city, you would also have on a ship like Intrepid. So that's why we see a variety of chairs here. Sometimes you might just need a boring place to sit. So that's why we have some of these green chairs over here. Sometimes if you have an office job, you just might want a regular old place to sit. So I want to take a look at some photographs of these chairs in their natural environment, and let's see if we can figure out what they may have been used for. So take a look at this historic image here, and just try to determine what is going on in this image. What do we think we see? What is happening here? And looking at this image, it looks like some rooms that I've been in the past. Looking at the chairs, I see like a desk, so something that I could possibly write on. I also see a lot of equipment laid out around this room. It also reminds me, if anyone here plays a sport or dances or plays an instrument, you may have been in a room before where you're preparing for either a show or a game or something important. Yeah, so I've seen in the chat someone mentioned it's a flight briefing that we're looking at. Yes, correct. So we're looking at pilots learning about their mission before they go out to fly. So these chairs are what I would consider some of the more comfortable chairs that we had in front of us before. So these chairs are comfortable because these pilots will be sitting in these chairs for a very long time, learning about everything they need to know before they go out on their mission. So this is a World War II era image that we're looking at here. And a way that we can tell is by looking at the helmets on the pilots' heads. So the helmets, we see those goggles, we see those headphones there, but there's like fabric protecting their heads there. And that might protect from the cold, but nowadays we might be used to seeing a little bit more protection for pilots. And that's because technology has changed over time, right? So I want to show an element showing how technology has changed a little bit. And this element involves chairs like this. Yes, Benedict also noticed the helmets on the ceiling. So that's in case of an emergency that they might need those harder helmets. Let's say if there was a fire they needed to put out, they would have those hard helmets or anything that might protect themselves. But if we're looking at this image here, I saw Benedict mention earlier the ejection seat. So we're looking at a photograph of the ejection seat right here. And someone would want to use an ejection seat in case of an emergency, right? So in this case, this pilot had to leave their aircraft for some reason. In this case, they broke through that glass. We see that glass and shrapnel kind of flying all around this pilot. Generally, there is a button to release the canopy, so the pilot does not have to worry about going through that canopy. But if there is an emergency the pilot has to go through, they at least have a stronger helmet to protect their heads. So the ejection seat that we have in our collection, this particular ejection seat, was used starting 1948. So the United States didn't widely use ejection seats until around this time. So we're not going to see too many being used by the United States during World War II. But after, especially in the jet age, we're going to see ejection seats more commonly used. And so we're seeing this pilot with that very hard helmet protecting them. Again, more chairs, but some chairs very specific to what we would see on an aircraft carrier. Not so much chairs we would see just in a normal city. And now we have another image here that I want us to take a look at. And just try to figure out what might be happening here. So you can talk to someone next to you. You can write in the comments below what you're noticing. So what we see here. So looking at this image, I've noticed the first thing that strikes my eye are these waves crashing against these ships here. And then I notice there's something in the middle. So Benedict mentioned food resupply that we're seeing here. So Benedict mentioned about food resupply. So what we're seeing is something very similar to what we could see with a ship when it's getting resupplied. So where a supply ship could throw a cable across the ship and something could go in between. But in this case, we're actually seeing a pilot going from one ship to another. All right, so I'm going to just, so we're seeing one pilot go from one ship to another. And this is because if a pilot ends up in the water, whether it was during World War II or in the jet age where they're using an ejection seat, they land in the water. Intrepid is very large. They might not always be able to go right next to that pilot, or that pilot might be very far away, so another ship might retrieve them. So now you need to get that pilot from one ship to another. So they would throw that cable across, similar to what they would use for food resupply, and bring that pilot from one ship to another. So I see a very interesting question. I'll give a little question break. Does anyone have questions so far about the chairs we have seen or anything we've seen so far? So it's true that it would have taken about 5 years to build a ship the size of Intrepid, but they got it done in 2 years because of the sped up manufacturing during World War II. So the type of ship Intrepid is an Essex-class carrier. And an Essex class normally takes around 3 years to build. Intrepid was built in Newport News, Virginia, and it was built very quickly. Yes, because of the need for the ship during World War II. So it's built in less than 2 years, in about 18 months. Any other questions, friends? And did they ever have to fly in specialists for things like complex injuries that would maybe require complex surgeries? So that is a very interesting question. I do know there was a surgeon on board ship, and in the sick bay, they had everything that you would see in a hospital. It was very, very advanced technology for the time, and they had the ability to help anyone that might have been injured and complete a lot of different surgeries. I'm not sure if they would have the time to fly in specific specialists, but that is definitely an interesting question. And did they always have releasable canopies? So that's really interesting. So I think not knowing that there are many, so with the F-14 canopy release, so it could depend on the aircraft as well. It depends which one had releasable and which did not. But that is why the ejection seat had some type of protection in itself. Just the ejection seat had protection for the pilot. So the actual metal part of the ejection seat would hit the glass if it needed to, as opposed to the pilot's helmet having to hit the glass. And you see one more. And did they have helicopter pilot recovery ops? Yes, there was helicopter pilot recovery ops as well. But if the pilot happened to be retrieved by another ship, this is how they would go from one ship to another. Great questions. Thank you so much. Great, friends. So we took a look at some chairs here, learned a little bit about the people on board. Now let's take a look at some aircraft. So we're going to make our way over to one of my favorite aircraft on the ship. As we're still talking about Intrepid's early days, let's talk about one of Intrepid's earlier aircraft. So we're going to take a look at a World War II era aircraft here. One of my favorite planes in Intrepid's collection, the TBM Avenger that we're looking at here. And feel free to write in the chat some things we notice as we're looking at this aircraft. Something that generally, yes, the TBM Avenger. And something that generally pops out to me when I'm looking at this aircraft is the wings. Because generally when I'm thinking of a plane like the Avenger, I'm thinking of the wings kind of sticking out, more like how planes I'm used to seeing, right? So the wings kind of straight out. But because Intrepid is an aircraft carrier, it has to deal with a different type of issue. Because there's limited space on a ship like Intrepid. Intrepid could have 80 to 100 aircraft at a time during World War II. So if the Avenger, if its wings were stretched out, would be about 54 feet long. So that is a lot of space. So the engineers designing airplanes for aircraft carriers made sure the wings could fold. So feel free to kind of stretch your arms out like the wings of the plane. If you need a nice little stretch right now, you can turn slowly to the left, turn slowly to the right. You might be noticing you're bumping into a few things, but if you fold your arms up and do the same thing, you might have a lot more space. So definitely have these folding wings on the aircraft. Feel free to mention anything else you notice as we're looking at this aircraft here. So we also see this 2,000-pound torpedo. The job of the Avenger was to drop this 2,000-pound torpedo into the water, and it would zoom towards enemy ships and hopefully sink them. Keep in mind, this is World War II. The technology was not quite as it is today. So there was not heat-seeking torpedoes at this time. They didn't lock onto a radar. They would just go straight in and go in a straight line and hoping that they would hit its target. But if it did hit its target, it had devastating capabilities and was definitely able to sink a ship. So what we're looking at here, the Avenger is a propeller-driven aircraft. The majority of the aircraft that we're going to see during World War II are going to be propeller-driven. As we move into the Cold War, Vietnam War, we're going to see more jet aircraft. Something else that's very interesting about the Avenger here is its color. So just take a look at its color, and you might notice that we see three colors that are standing out: a very dark blue, a lighter blue, and then we also have a lighter white color too. And that is because this plane wanted to be camouflaged. So this aircraft went about 276 miles per hour. That was around its top speed. So that's pretty fast for something that's moving, but not so fast for an aircraft. So yes, definitely want to have sea camouflage. So flying over the water, it could hide. And then if you look at the underbelly of it, has that white color to almost look like clouds. It's also counter shading, this type of camouflage, what it's called. So it breaks up the image and makes it hard for someone to kind of see how big this object might be as it's coming towards, and they might miss it too. So I'm just looking at the comments. I'm seeing a really interesting question from Benedict. Did the Avenger also carry bombs? So 2,000, yeah. So 2,000 seems pretty. So Intrepid could carry a 2,000-pound torpedo or two 1,000-pound bombs. On Intrepid, there would be torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighter planes as well. So the dive bombers would carry more of those bombs. So they would swoop down and drop bombs on top of an enemy ship, while the Avenger was generally dropping these torpedoes in the water. And let's actually make our way to another component of the Avenger. It's actually this turret that we see over here. And the Avenger is one of the first aircraft to have a turret like this that can spin 360 degrees and shoot 50 caliber bullets here. And remember, the Avenger was not the fastest aircraft. And while it was trying to sink ships, the enemy was trying to take it down. And what the enemy was using to try to take down a ship like Avenger were 20 millimeter ammunition caliber bullets like this. All right. So the Avenger would not want to interact too much with these bullets here. So definitely wanted some protection, and that protection took the form of this turret. So the Avenger would have the pilot on board, also have a gunner inside this turret, and then in addition had a navigator, so someone preparing the torpedo to be launched as well. So something interesting about this turret that we see here is there's not much space. So there's not much space that we see here. So people were fairly crammed inside, and a lot of the turret gunners actually suffered hearing loss in one ear from firing this 50 caliber, 600 rounds, I believe, per minute in this turret. So they actually suffered some hearing loss in here. Something very interesting about this is there were no ejection seats on the Avenger. So all the parachutes were down below inside the aircraft. So the crew of an Avenger actually had to make like an emergency plan in case something was not working out and the ship was going down. One pilot even stated that he had a plan that he was going to kick the parachute towards the turret gunner after the turret gunner releases from their turret, so they can just grab that parachute quickly, and then the pilot would then help the navigator get everything ready so they could all leave the plane safely. So it's amazing what a crew of just this plane would be able to do and how they would work together in times of struggle, but also what the crew of Intrepid would do as well. So I'm going to bring us to another aircraft, but you might notice this aircraft looks a little bit different. That's because we're moving further away from World War II era aircraft and closer to Cold War era aircraft. So right here, we are looking at the FJ3, the North American FJ3 Fury. And this is one of the first Navy jet aircraft that could fly off of an aircraft carrier that we're looking at here. A big clue, this is not a propeller airplane. There is no propeller in front the way jet planes work. They take a lot of air inside. That air interacts with jet fuel, and fire pushes that jet plane, fire and exhaust pushes that jet plane forward. So they fly a lot higher and faster than their propeller counterparts. So these jet planes that we're looking at here, this Fury that we're looking at here, could go about 600 miles per hour. Again, the Avenger is going about 270 miles per hour. So you can see that technology is definitely changing here. But we still see those folded wings, which we will still see on aircraft carriers generally to save that space. So I mentioned the Cold War. So what's happening in the Cold War, it's not the same type of war as World War II was. Instead, it's more of a war of ideologies. We have the United States, and then we have Soviet Union, which is now Russia. And United States and Soviet Union were competing against each other more so than actively attacking the other country. So instead of attacking the other country specifically, they were trying to convince the rest of the world that they were kind of the better country to follow. And one way they were doing this was by making really awesome aircraft, showing off their technology. And another piece of technology that they would try to show off, both countries would try to show off, were their space technology. So let's make our way to this object over here. And this, my friends, is a Mercury space capsule that we are looking at. So Intrepid during the Cold War had a lot of these jet planes that were very impressive. They were also looking for enemy submarines to know where these submarines were located, but they were also involved in something called the space race. And what Intrepid's role in the space race was to retrieve astronauts after they came back down from space, after they returned from space. So let's go take a look at this process. So we have these rockets blasting off up into space. That's great to hear, Benedict. We have these rockets blasting off into space, and then we're going to see these space capsules separate from the rest of that rocket. So the space capsule is actually just the very tiny top part of this rocket here. All of this is fuel to get the space capsule up to its different destination. The first space capsule we were looking at was the Mercury space capsule, and that's just going up and down from going up into space and right back down. That's going to start going on some orbits around the Earth, and then we're going to have the Gemini space missions, which are going to go a little bit farther, and they're going to be practicing because the space race has a finish line. Feel free to write in the chat where that finish line is. I'll give you guys some time while we're continuing on with the presentation. And Benedict mentioned that they have a Saturn V model, which is going to go to that destination, which we're talking about. So after these rockets blast off into space, these capsules need a nice, soft landing. And they also want a landing where you're not worried about what they might hit nearby. So a perfect place for this was the ocean. So these space capsules will land in the Caribbean, and the astronauts would be secure inside. They had a flotation device around the space capsule, but then we need to get these astronauts back home. So a way to do this was to have a helicopter pick up that astronaut from the capsule, and then a ship like Intrepid would go right next to that space capsule and use a giant crane to pick that space capsule up. So Yeah, really like how Benedict mentioned Russia or the Soviet Union was competing with the United States, and they had a lot of firsts, but the finish line in space was the moon. It was decided to be the moon, and the United States, they were the country that had the first people land and walk on the surface of the moon. But so Intrepid was involved in Mercury missions and Gemini missions, picking up those astronauts and retrieving those space capsules like we see here. Okay, so in 1962, Intrepid picked up Mercury astronaut Scott Carpenter. So his mission involved orbiting around the Earth 3 times. So if anyone has seen the film Hidden Figures, John Glenn was the astronaut right before Scott Carpenter who completed the first orbits of the Earth for the United States. What is the fastest jet plane that took off from the Intrepid? So I will take us to look at that aircraft right after this, and we're going to, as we discuss the Vietnam War. And here's an image of Scott Carpenter on the flight deck of Intrepid. And then in 1965, Intrepid picked up John Young and Gus Grissom along with their Gemini 3 capsule. So then after the Gemini missions, Intrepid was involved with after the Mercury missions, Intrepid was involved with the Gemini missions. And the Gemini missions had the 2 astronauts inside. And Intrepid was unfortunately not involved with Apollo missions, but Intrepid played a big part in the space race. And here we see an image of some divers, we can call them frogmen, taking a nice photo around the space capsule here. Something really fun about Intrepid is that Intrepid loves their cake. So here we're seeing a picture of John Young and Gus Grissom taking a giant slice out of a cake. And when you have a very large cake, sometimes you just need something really big to carve that cake. So in this case, they have some military sabers that they're cutting this cake with. So let's make our way to the flight deck of Intrepid, and we're actually going to take a look at some Vietnam War aircraft, and we're going to go talk about that aircraft that Victor was asked about. I'm just going to switch tabs. I very apologize for that. There we go. All right, friends. So right now we're looking at the flight deck of Intrepid. One of my favorite spots on the ship. You see lovely New York City skyline here. We can see a lot of cool aircraft on the flight deck as well. We can just click around here. We're going to make our way to the back of the ship. And we're going to discuss some aircraft here. So again, Intrepid was created to participate in World War II. So Intrepid, as of today, is about 77 years old. So when Intrepid was involved in the Vietnam War, this was in the 1960s. So Intrepid saw a lot before this time, and Intrepid had definitely advanced technologically during this time, but newer aircraft carriers were being developed, and those newer aircraft carriers would receive the pinnacle of technology of this time. They would receive aircraft like the Phantom that we see over here. But because Intrepid's technology was a little bit outdated for this time, it couldn't necessarily handle like an aircraft like the Phantom, although it did have some aircraft like the Crusader, which we'll talk about in a bit. So a few pilots on Intrepid, when they were receiving attack aircraft, received the Sky Raider as opposed to the Phantom. And the Sky Raider still is a very, very impressive aircraft, but keep in mind, this is a propeller-driven aircraft that we're looking at here. Propeller-driven aircraft, not a jet aircraft. So when the Sky Raider was paired against this Russian plane, which was used by North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, the MiG-17, some people may have been very concerned for the Sky Raider here, right? So we're looking at these two aircraft. Let me back up just a little bit. We see the Sky Raider propeller plane. So the Sky Raider, its max speed is about 370 miles per hour. But as we're looking at the MiG-17 here, this aircraft goes about 711 miles per hour. But what's really interesting about Intrepid and Intrepid's pilots is Intrepid's pilots were highly advanced. They were amazing pilots. And Intrepid has a record for in the Vietnam War. This only happened 2 times, and one time this happened on Intrepid, where an Intrepid pilot in a propeller-driven plane, his name was Tom Patton, was able to take down a jet plane. And this is fascinating and amazing an amazing feat that he was able to do this. So in a propeller-driven aircraft was able to take out this very advanced MiG-17 aircraft. So that just is a testament to the ability of the pilots on board Intrepid. So I'm just going to stop for questions here. Does anyone have questions before I show another aircraft and something else pretty cool? And Tom Patton was the name of that pilot. Okay, friends, so I'm going to show. So Victor asked a question earlier about which is the fastest aircraft to have flown off Intrepid. And I believe to have flown off Intrepid, I believe it would have been the Crusader. I may have to have my colleague double check this for me, but I believe it's the Crusader here. And I believe that the speed of the Crusader is around 1,400 miles per hour. I might have to look that up, and I could definitely look that up and let you know. But I believe that the Crusader would be, the F-8 Crusader would be the fastest aircraft. So Intrepid did have access to this aircraft during the Vietnam War. And what's really impressive about this aircraft is its ability to kind of change the angle of to change its wings and actually point the nose of the aircraft downwards so it can look at the flight deck, because landing on the flight deck is no easy feat. And this aircraft going so fast needs to be able to see itself landing, to drop that arrestor hook and attach to a cable and slow down on Intrepid. So the Crusader goes about 1,200 miles per hour. So 1,227 miles per hour for this aircraft here. Great. Does anyone have any more questions regarding the Crusader, the Skyraider, the MiG-17? All right. Sounds good. So Intrepid, after the Vietnam War, was decommissioned in 1974. So Intrepid, Victor, I see a really great question. So yes, so I will show you our vertical takeoff and landing, one of our vertical takeoff and landing aircraft in a bit. So Intrepid was decommissioned in 1974. And the United States was not sure what to do with this ship. Again, more advanced aircraft carriers have been developed at this time. What was going to happen to this ship? So that is when Zachary and Elizabeth Fisher decided to turn this ship into a museum. And the ship became a museum in 1982. And since then, Intrepid has had a wide variety of aircraft in our collection. I'm going to take us to look at one of these vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and then I'll show you one of the gems in Intrepid's collection after that. So let's make our way over here and take a look at the Harrier. So I love seeing the Harrier here because it's right next to our collection of helicopters. It's always great to have students come to the museum and ask, oh, why is this aircraft here? That is because this aircraft, it is a jet aircraft. You can see by its intake here, but what's really impressive about this aircraft, it's able to point its jet, I'm trying to get a good angle on this for you. It's able to push its jet exhaust downwards, and by pushing its exhaust downwards, is able to go upwards. So yes, this is a vertical takeoff and landing, so it's able to go upwards and then move forward. This is a VTOL aircraft here, the Harrier, that we're looking at. And then we just have our beautiful collection of helicopters here as well. Of course. So we got to look at the flight deck, and you might have noticed a very large building, a very large building on the flight deck as well. So now let's get a chance to look at what was inside that very large building, and that will be our final stop for today. So I'm going to bring us to see what was inside and what that is. is the Space Shuttle Enterprise. So if we were to walk in that very large building, this is what we would see on the flight deck. This is the first space shuttle ever made. There were 6 space shuttles made. 4 exist today. We recently had the anniversary of the loss of the Challenger. And this is Enterprise that we're looking at here. And again, Enterprise, the very first space shuttle made. This space shuttle orbiter did not go into space as the prototype for the remainder of the missions. But even though this space shuttle did not go into space, a lot of the information we were able to receive for later space shuttle missions came from the tests that took place using the Enterprise. So even after the Challenger and Columbia disasters, when NASA was trying to determine what happened, they did a lot of tests on Enterprise to determine what happened in those situations and how that could be prevented for later missions as well. So the space shuttle would generally be attached to rockets like so. I have this lovely plushy space shuttle here. So we see there would be this large liquid fuel tank, these solid rocket boosters. This would help propel that space shuttle up into space. And then the space shuttle would glide down on its own accord as it's re-entering Earth's atmosphere, kind of like a big paper airplane. So you might notice there is no propeller in the front of this of the space shuttle. It also does not have a jet intake like the jet aircraft that we looked at before. Instead, this space shuttle just glides down through it with its lovely large wings here and lands. And we looked at space capsules earlier. And the reason why the United States started to work on these space shuttles is because they wanted a reusable spacecraft. Yeah, and yes, I really love one of the comments someone mentioned. Ironically, John Young was test pilot for Enterprise. Yes, John Young, who is involved in those Gemini missions the Gemini mission that Intrepid retrieved. So we're looking at a space shuttle here, and space shuttles were intended to be reusable spacecraft, because those Gemini capsules, those Mercury, Gemini, Apollo capsules, they would land in the water. They would be fairly damaged as they re-entered Earth's atmosphere. So you could only use them one time. But with a space shuttle, you can use them as many times as you wanted, as long as you kept repairing them. And the space shuttles that we looked at before could fit one person in the Mercury space capsule, 2 people, the Gemini space capsule, 3 people, the Apollo space capsule. But here we could fit a few more astronauts, 5 to 8 astronauts, and in the front part of the space shuttle. And in the back, we have the payload. Space shuttles are a lot like space trucks. You can bring really large and heavy things up into space using them. So these doors can open up. You put something very large inside, open them up in space, and release that object up into space. So that is how the International Space Station was able to be built. That is how the Hubble Space Telescope was brought into space using these magnificent space shuttles. Does anyone have any questions related to the space shuttles, related to what we have seen on the flight deck? So something you also may have noticed are these tiles on the very front part of the space shuttle, and that is to protect the astronauts from the heat. Okay, so we see these tiles. It's part of the thermal protection system for the space shuttle. And so when we looked at the space capsule before, you might have seen some ridges on that space capsule. That was part of the space capsule's protection system to protect the astronauts from the heat inside. In this case, we have these tiles. We see the black because that absorbs a bit more heat as the space capsule re-entering Earth's atmosphere. And we see the white kind of bouncing radiation away, but still absorbing a lot of heat. So about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit that these these tiles are able to withstand. Another question we often get is, how do astronauts get inside? So we see this little hatch here. There would be a handle that we could have here as well that would allow this door to open up and the astronauts to enter. Thank you. All right, friends. So we have hit around the 45-minute mark. If anyone has any more questions, I can make my way back to the flight deck. We can take a look at some aircraft and I'll answer some final questions there. So I'm looking around, seeing if we have any questions. Great. Make our way back to the flight deck. Let me see. So we can see there's a large amount of a wide variety of aircraft that we see in Intrepid's collection here. Please join us again for another one of these programs. So we have programs every single week. Please check out our schedule online. So I'm going to share information where you can find that. Will be in the description of this. It'll be found in the description of this link right here. And let me see if I can get this to show for you. So please follow and subscribe to get the latest updates on our upcoming live streams. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I had a wonderful time working with you all. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.